Hey everybody, welcome to another tutorial on Tech for Humans. This tutorial is talking a little bit about importing objects into Blender and hand painting on their surfaces. Blender has a lot of good painting tools that are great for hand painted textures, as well as more conventional methods of texturing. Today we're going to be focusing on specifically importing an OBJ that has an unwrap, but no textures applied to it. We're going to generate those textures inside of Blender and hook them up into Blender's material system. And we're also going to go over a little bit the texturing tools and how they're used and what some of the important settings are, things to keep track of, things like that. So before we start with all that, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to go up, we're going to expand this panel here, right like this. We're going to go over to user preferences. Now sometimes people go in through the file system and all that, and I don't really like to do that. Up here in the search bar, we're going to type in material or matter, and just enable our material utilities. And this is using the Shift Q function right now as far as a shortcut key, and we're just going to continue with that. And then just for expedience sake, we're going to shift this over to a UV image editor, and that'll be perfect for our needs today. So to get this started, what we need to do is we need to delete everything in our scene. This is just basic housekeeping as far as I'm concerned. We don't want to have a cluttered scene or anything like that. We're going to go up to File, Import, OBJ. Now we've chosen an OBJ because it's an old, reliable file format to exchange between programs, and I just prefer it, especially moving objects between Maya and Blender. Alright, and we're going to pick, in this case, the round cube OBJ. The OBJ export process for most systems kicks out a material file. You can go ahead and ignore that. It pretty much gets auto-read. And if you click and select your cube, again with right click, you'll notice that it actually already has my materials on it, which is really handy. So what we need to do is we need to generate a texture to use on this before we obviously do anything else. So we're just going to note by hitting tab that this has an unwrap in our UV image editor, and we're going to go ahead and hit new. We're going to call this my texture. Now obviously it can be anything that you want, but this is just what we're using for right now. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and that generates a 1024 by 1024 black texture. Now this is important. We have the texture here, and maybe it's even applied to our object here in the 3D viewport. If you go down here and just change it from solid to texture, you'll see it's black. It's there, but we can't actually draw on it yet, mainly because it needs to be loaded up in the object's material settings. So with the my material selected, we're going to click over on texture, and we're going to see that we have no textures actually applied to this material, right? So that's what I'm talking about. There's no material loaded up in the material slot. It's on the model, it's viewable, it's assigned to the UV coordinates, but it's not actually running through material, and we need to fix that. Now to do that, we can't just automatically magically go, well, it's in Blender here, so it should be in Blender here. We actually have to save this to the hard drive. So let's go to Image, Save as Image, and I'm going to navigate to the exact same folder I've been working in, and I'm going to say this is the My Texture PNG, imagine that, and I'm going to hit Save as Image. Alright, now no change here, but we can now access it from here. So this is the My Internal Texture. Right? This is the texture slot that our image gets loaded into, right? So don't think of this as the image itself. This is actually just the variable location. So we're going to go and make sure this is set to image or movie, and we're going to hit open, go to our folder where we saved our image, double click, add my texture. Now just to be safe, it's good to go ahead and make sure under your mapping coordinates you select under map, UV map, and that's just good practice. It usually doesn't matter. Alright, so that is most of what we need to do for our setup itself. Now there are two ways to paint on the surface of an object. You can either do it in the 3D viewport, you can do it in the UV image editor itself, or you can switch back and forth between the two. Now I'm going to optimize my workspace a little bit. Just going to drag this here on these little hash marks, drag down, the same thing because I'm not going to be doing any animating, right? First thing I'm going to do is go over here where it says object mode. I'm going to have it switch to texture paint, right? And all of a sudden over here on our tool shelf we have all of our texture settings. Now that's great. We're going to do the same type of thing over here on our UV image editor. We're going to go from view to paint, right? And now all these options will work across both of these windows. Now for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to be using my mouse. And the thing I'm going to keep in mind is that there are settings in here that do respond to tablet pressure, right? And the tablet pressure is just right here. You can toggle it on or off. Tablet sensitivity is handled inside of your computer, however you're managing that. You know, that's again a separate tutorial. We're just going to very quickly just do a little stroke right on this, right like that, right? You can just automatically start drawing on it, and you'll notice that it automatically projects, and everything you do over here happens over here. If I do the same thing over here, you'll notice that it's actually drawing in the window simultaneously. So if I want to have a more flat-on perspective, I can just draw over here. If I want to be able to draw more angular, or just hit the corners up, I can do it right here, right? So that's pretty slow. So let's talk about some of our brushes. Now your biggest ones are probably going to be your fill and your smear and your text draw. I found that soften works okay, but fill is probably the best one. You should be aware that fill by itself is a very strong and powerful brush. It will automatically fill whatever color that you're trying to paint across this thing uniformly, which is not always desirable. And you can control that with the mask. So if you hit M here, right? I've hit M and then I right click on my object, right? I can actually selectively pick, let's just do something a little like that. I can pick which areas I want to work in, right? So now if I go back with my fill and start setting it to, let's say, white, it only fills those selected polygons, which is really handy. Same works for texture draw. If I go in and start drawing with my gray, it will only draw in areas that I have set aside with my mask. Once I'm done, I can just again right click or shift right click to select specific areas that I want to work in now, and so on. When I'm done, I just hit M and I can go back to painting like normal. So that's probably the biggest thing to keep in mind with the fill tool, is that mask. Now you can draw a mask pixel wise if you like. I don't really recommend it. I find that it can be a little buggy at times, so we'll just leave that one alone for right now. So we have, with our brushes, we're going to just use text draw again. A couple settings. This is a standard color wheel. I don't feel like there's a ton to explain there. You've got the radius, which is controlled here. You can also control that with your bracket keys, square bracket or curly bracket keys, just like Photoshop. And you can also control the strength, right? And the strength is how much pixel information is being applied at a given time and in a given brush stroke, and that's pretty handy. You can also use the F key, right? Press and hold the F key, and then click to affect the overall basically size and fuzziness and fall off of your brush. Pretty handy tool. After that, you have the blend types. Now, blending modes is a little bit weird, and believe it or not, this is actually a feature in Photoshop that you can use. But what it basically does is allows you to paint with a blending effect. Now, this is a little more advanced than I would want to go into necessarily, but it allows you to really add over top of color information, right? So if I went to black and hit add, I'm not getting any effect here. But if I go over, you know, with a lighter color, just like add would affect a blending mode in Photoshop, it overlays that way. So all these settings work for that. Generally, you can leave it on mix for just direct color, and that works well. Now, accumulate, by default, if I just hold down my mouse and go across like this just once, you'll see that it just lays down flat color once, and if I want to add on more on top of that, I have to go over it again. Accumulate lays down a lot of material really quickly, right? So it just maxes out your options. It's pretty handy. Alpha I don't use very much. Using gradient involves a lot more just thinking about it. It's way beyond the scope of this tutorial, so we'll just leave that there for now. When it comes to painting with textures, you can just load them up through here. That's again a thing for a different day. We're doing hand painted textures right now. Now you can also control the stroke, and this is for me where the magic happens a lot with Blender. Is if you go in here, you have things like space. Now space is a standard brush, and you can control, we'll just expand that a little bit, the spacing, right? You can get a nice dotted brush, do all sorts of fun things with that. The smaller that spacing is, the smoother it is. Now sometimes when it gets around 1, occasionally depending on your brush size, depending on what you're painting, Blender will chug a little. So you want to watch out for that. Jitter itself, it's a bit like scatter in Photoshop, right? Gives you a nice, just randomized batching, right? You just send that up really high, you can get a wide area of detail. You get some really nice variation with this brush. Alright. Now smooth stroke, I've seen this feature in a couple areas. I've seen this in like Mudbox and things like that. But it basically allows you to create a nice smooth line. There's a little bit of a delay, so if you're trying to draw something like this big, you know, this area this big, it's not going to work really well. But as you draw over a larger area, it gives you a nice smooth line. Right, so it gets rid of some of that shakiness that you might find in your normal hand, which is extremely useful. Alright. Curve is the actual edge fall off of the brush itself. Let's just make sure that this is off. Right. Now if we look here, we have, let's go to a nice clean edge. We have a fairly fuzzy dot, and that's because this is set to a nice gradient fall off. This is full effect towards the center. This is the effect towards the edge. If we go to a flat brush, we get a nice sharp outline. So you can do a lot to control the quality of your brush strokes just with that. Alright. There we go. Okay. Now it is possible to take the image and quick edit it and take it into, let's say, Photoshop from a certain camera angle. That's okay. I don't often do that. You do have the ability to paint on something symmetrically. Let's just go ahead and pop that on there. Right. Let's see if I can find a good example of this. There we go. So now you see we're painting on both sides. This is similar to like sculpt modes. You'll see this in ZBrush. It's just mirroring the strokes you're doing. So if you want to paint something symmetrically on both sides, save yourself some time, this is a great way to do it. Alright. Let's see. Now, in terms of everything else, all these other tools in here, I haven't found a ton of use for them yet when it comes to painting, but that's, you know, pretty much the big thing. So that's the basic texturing 101 setup for Blender. This isn't really designed to go over like super in-depth on like how to do everything, but it's just a good overview on how to do the basic things, get things set up so that you can start working with it. The rest of it comes down to painting, and that's really up to the individual artist. There's little things like you know, adding light and shadow. Again, that's not really a technical thing, it's more of an artistic tutorial, which is really outside of the scope of this channel for now. But otherwise, thanks for watching. If you have any questions about this, please leave comments below. If you have any recommendations on how to improve these videos, please send me messages. That's always appreciated. Otherwise, my name's Dustin, this is Tech for Humans, and thank you so much for watching.